The Joining the Dots podcast focuses on the many challenges facing education and how different approaches and innovations are needed to meet those challenges.
Join co-hosts Matt Jessup and Elle Kingsley as they have discussions with innovative educators, business leaders, policymakers, and other stakeholders, and guests looking at transforming the future of education.
Morning, evening, Nick. Morning, Dal. Evening, Nick. I'm getting Nick, Englishman abroad, Yorkshireman abroad. Are you Yorkshireman, you think?
Yeah.
AI expert, co-author of The Next Word, AI and Teachers will come about. But I think first question we've got, Al, is our Leeds going to get promoted, Nick? And if they get promoted, are they going to manage to stay up?
Well, if you want to ask complex questions, there's no more complex question than that, I can guarantee you, because being a Leeds fan is definitely being on the roller coaster and not on the waltzers, and it's the extremist of extreme roller coasters. So ask me in a month, and then I'll give you an answer.
6 games.
I was kind of hoping you'd have an algorithm to predict that more accurately, Nick.
You'd think you'd put it into AI, wouldn't you?
No, there's nothing predictable about that.
No. You're quite involved in AI, Nick, to say the least, and you're an expert in it. And obviously you speak in England and you speak in Australia and all over the world. Integrating AI into education. It's probably at different levels in Australia and England as well, in various ways. What do you see as the most significant part of AI in terms of educations and recent developments?
I think, to be honest, Matt, my mind's beginning to change right now. By what I'm seeing both in my own school and what I believe should be happening outside of there. And I suppose there's a risk in this as well, what I'm going to describe in a minute. There is a big risk in that we start to leave people behind. But I do believe that at least a subsection of people should be starting to move away from talking about AI and start talking about what actually happens as a result of AI. You know, because the reality is now, I think the biggest thing we should be telling ourselves, and I've been doing this as a bit of a self-experiment for the last few weeks, just going, AI can do everything. If we convince ourselves that AI can do everything, then that starts to change your mindset as to exactly what you're thinking about. We're just talking about education here. So if we're talking about AI can do everything in education, if you keep telling yourself that, you don't go with the mantra of, oh, well, it can't do this and it can't do that very well. It's not very good at video. It keeps hallucinating and all those kinds of things. If you push that to one side and start going, it can do everything, then realistically, what does that leave you with? That leaves you with big, deep philosophical questions about the existence of education, what you are as an educator, what your role is, why bother doing anything at all, you know? And when you start to do that, then you start not to talk about AI, you start to talk about the whole essence of education, don't you? What does it all mean? What's our purpose? Why are we doing this? What is the point in that exercise I'm doing? What's the point in that conversation with that young person? What's the point in that assessment? And so on and so forth. And if we all did that, if we all kept doing that on a regular basis, before long, I think we'd have far more nuanced conversations and far more deep philosophical discussions. And we'd actually get to the point of where we should be getting very, very quickly before we get overrun in this tsunami, which is happening right before our eyes with young people, with industry and in our, around us. And it also, by doing that, I think allows us to stop making excuses and stop settling for little Band-Aid type approaches. Oh, let's have an assessment scale because that really matters. Or, let's bring in a lockdown browser because we think that's going to solve the world, which, yeah, it's okay in the short term, but it's not going to solve anything at all. Or let's go back to timed exams because realistically that's going to make more kids come to school, isn't it, when more of them are dropping out, So, I mean, I know this seems like a bit of a rant and perhaps that's the end of the podcast after this, but, I think, where I'm at right now, I think if you've gone along the journey in the last couple of years and you're trying to hold on to the coattails of the even faster development that's happening in this race to be the AI god, which Google and everybody else is doing, then you can see this thing shaping in front of you that it's a complete joke as to what's actually education's doing compared to what's actually happening. So if you've been in this game to in the last 2 years and before that, but realistically since generative AI came along, and you've been doing stuff and you've been integrating in your schools and you've been trying things out and you've been thinking about things and experimenting, you've got to start taking next steps. And the next steps is not about AI. The next steps about what are you going to do as an educator?
Do you think, I absolutely resonate with what you share there. I increasingly see that the adoption of AI, the discussions around AI in education, in a healthy way, has become more of a catalyst for us to reflect on the most human aspects of education. And whilst we recognise that AI is not going to magically go away, and we know that the workplace is increasingly using AI, it almost highlights the importance of those most human skills. And so there's this struggle for how do we potentially change our curriculum to reflect how we capture the things that us as human beings are most good at and most capable at. And that creates a whole separate conversation. And then in separate, because of this perhaps false narrative or fear that AI will replace the human being, replace the teacher in its entirety, the natural persuasion with fear is to find ways to quickly dismiss it and just not continue the conversation. Is that a fair encapsulation of how you see and feel things at the moment?
I don't disagree with you, but I actually think it's we've got to have more of a sledgehammer approach. I know that may seem a bit coarse and a bit crass, but AI doesn't wait for egos. It doesn't wait for the juggernaut to turn slowly around, which education typically does. This is not like any other tech out there. This is not like social media, which has we've got ourselves into a pickle in over how long now, how many years has that taken? We're already getting ourselves into a pickle with AI, and we've only been here in 2.5.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Yeah. So, I think if you look at that, it's not going to wait for things to happen. And I think if you're looking at something that's having an effect, as we've seen in the Anthropic study in this week, and in parent-teacher interviews I've had in the last month or so, when I've talked to every single parent, every one of them is being touched by AI in some way in their jobs. It's either they're involved in training, it's throughout, they're beginning to fear it. And then I've got another example with 3-year-old and 4-year-old parents. Their fear, this is 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in our ELC in a coffee morning the other week. Yep, we're scared of social media of our kids, and we're scared of AI. 3 and 4-year-olds. How many 3 and 4-year-old parents were saying that a year ago? This is a huge shift and a huge change. And then all the things that young people are doing, all the foul and wonderful things and everything in between that they're doing, is just, I just think we're all living in this weird sort of, I don't know, it's almost like blue pill, red pill. And I don't think we've seen it in that sort of depth or that sort of speed or that sort of complexity before. So you're right, Al, to say that, but I just think it needs far more of a big boot approach than it does, like a soft slipper.
Yeah, I support the big boot, but I guess there's a natural persuasion because of so much that's visible at the moment and in discussion and narrative that actually AI, social media, technology, sometimes the term edtech, everything's been smushed together in something to be scared of.
Mm-hmm.
That seems that kind of sense of actually it's easier to just kind of pull all these things together and say that they're kind of somebody behind the scenes is doing something nefarious and it's going to impact, rather than actually embracing and saying, you can look and you can embrace the positives of technology without being blind to the negatives. You can learn the skills, the digital citizenship, the other skills that empower you. I guess that word that always crops up whenever we're having broader education conversations is how do we provide agency for staff and students to be equipped for the future world, and whether we like it or not, AI is going to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, there's no doubt at all that the Jonathan Haidt Brigade is having a massive effect all around the world. A knock-on effect. It's very disturbing. It's very disturbing to me, and I don't want to get into the banning argument because there's no winner in that at the moment. You're not a winner if you go anti that. What I'm focused on, and I've put it out there, is I'm focused on where is the education piece that's actually filling the void if you do ban somehow limit use of this technology in any way at all. Where's the education that's happening? And that applies to AI, that applies to phones, that applies to social media. But it also applies in the level of values. And one of the biggest things I think we're missing out here is values. The values you have in school, when you bring in this technology, don't bring in this technology, whatever this technology is, whether that's AI, social media, or anything. What values are you teaching young people? And isn't that what we should really be focusing on? So we're back to the same point, aren't we? We're back to that same point that's been uttered for a long, long time. What's the purpose of education? What should we be teaching? How should we be teaching? And this is what AI forcing us to do. And in a way, let's have those conversations and let's start making some decisions about what we are actually going to do and what we believe in. And that's going to be different in different contexts and in different places. And I get that, and I'm happy with that. But unless you start trying things out that are different and we start going towards what I love, like constructionism, you know, you go to constructivism, you can set kids with inquiry, you can set kids in messy play, whatever. Well, that's what I believe in, but it may not be what somebody else believes in. So unless you go down these routes and actually go down these things, instead of just looking for Band-Aids all the time, then you're allowing AI can do everything to come to the fore. Unless you allow that to happen, then you're going to carry on with the Band-Aids. That's the point I keep making here, and you're not going to have those deep-rooted conversations about where you want education to go.
What worries me, and there's nothing here I disagree with, is when you use words like sledgehammer and juggernaut, which I'm fully behind these comparisons, and I'm fully supportive of them, is that within everything you've both spoken about there, the discrepancies between those who are embracing AI and those that aren't, or that are banning it, if you like, for want of a better approach, is just going to increase these gaps. And whatever the conversation about the purpose of education is, there's some already way ahead of the curve, there's some massively behind the curve, there's some struggling to keep up with it. How would you do all what you're proposing, but make sure everybody is included?
Yeah, and I did say that at the start, didn't it, Matt, when I said the issue is I'm going to talk about this thing here. And I just think, you know, like I'm biased by my own view of being 2 or 3 years down here, and I appreciate that there is a significant number of people not, you know, on that same path or somewhere behind in that journey or whatever you want to say that. But I do think there's ways of catching up pretty fast now. And that does not come from cookie cutter. Let's just get somebody in to do their keynote, and then we'll just go back to what we always do. And that's what tends to be happening. It's not that. And don't get me wrong, I'm one of those people that's gone and done those cookie cutter sessions. So, you know, if you're going to pay somebody to do that, then they're going to do that. But that's not going to have the effect you want it to have. So first and foremost, I think you can shortcut the process at the moment by not focusing on, let's all learn some scientific way of prompting. That's just totally unnecessary. You know, all it is about clear instruction, and all it is about experimentation and iteration. Let's build confidence, and quickly let's show people how effective the use of generative AI can be for their teacher practice, for their administrative work, for the way that they engage students. Let's bring students in that mix and learn from them, as I've always talked about and did a PhD about. Let's put students front and centre in that mix. Let's learn together, and let's develop strategies that we want to use in our practice with young people. They're both learning and teaching practice, and that immediately shifts the pedagogical stance that you have, because you then are no longer stood at the front of the class. You're in the mix with the learner. And then if you're doing all of that, that's not going to take you a long time to start to see what power this technology has, regardless of whether you have skills and confidence. I think the confidence is the biggest thing here. It's not necessarily the skills, it's the confidence. I think also we have to move away from worrying about keeping up with the Joneses. You know, like, I still haven't played with the recent advancements with Google, but I'll just have to look at everybody else playing with them. I can just look at what Darren Coxon's doing, or I can look at what Chris is doing. It doesn't, you know, I don't have to do it all the time, and that's where a network comes into being. And so, likewise, people in my school can just go, "Oh, have you done this? Have you played with that model?" rather than them do it. You know, so I think I think we can shortcut that process. We can move quite quickly. We can focus on our strengths. And I've actually got a self-assessment framework that I've built as well, and a model that I've built to actually put values on this as well. So what I'm looking at the moment, I've got in place is going, if you can measure where you're at as a self-assessment framework and then do some things with AI and then move to another and self-assess yourself with the same framework later on in the year, can you put a value add on that as well? So I've actually got that in place, and I've got someone else looking at the framework in Japan as well. So I think that's important, is we've ignored some of the things that we've built up over time regarding tech integration, such as TPAC and all these frameworks that exist, that we can apply to AI if you have a look at that. And I'm doing that work at the moment.
I really like the sound of that, Nick. I mean, there are obviously lots of different approaches and frameworks. I always get a sense, whenever I start talking about educational technology and digital, it doesn't take long before TPAC or SAMA or something else gets thrown into the conversation. The challenge when it comes to the adoption of AI, and much like the recent narrative around PedTech, pedagogy-informed EdTech, is it's really hard to do something evidence-informed if you're using the same sets of measures as you've always used, because sometimes the measures are different. And also, you can't have something new that's also evidence-informed. You've got to have good folks like yourself creating those prompts in terms of a framework to say, look, there's different ways we can measure. Sometimes this is about, I guess my natural thing when I'm working with multi-academy trusts across our region or going to school districts is any measure always ends up being about something linked to assessment or progress, student progress, attainment data. Whereas increasingly there's a broader sense of, but what about progress in terms of actual student engagement? What about in terms of pressure on staff workload, the recruitment and retention, the longer term measure of freeing up the human to do more human to human nurture in the classroom? Maybe it's more SEMH and social emotional learning than it is curriculum, but it's all part of what are we trying to achieve? And that's different by school in many regards. So I guess that ramble is, don't we need to have slightly broader measures of progress or how there's a positive impact from the use of AI?
Yeah, you're probably right, and this self-assessment framework is I don't think for a minute it's going to look like that going forward. I just think it's a first attempt at trying to measure something within my school. So, and it's an attempt for an individual to be able to look at themselves and where they sit, which I think is important. As I said, it's about confidence. But the same tool also then feeds in an anonymized version to leadership, both at faculty level, year group level, and whole school, to be able to see whether have shifted across. In other words, it's an attempt to say, you need to pay me more because I'm doing a really good job.
Would you share those, please? Thank you very much.
Yes. No, it's a way of being able to go, well, yeah, we're doing this stuff with AI, but is it making any difference? Is it, like all the PD we're doing in our school? So if a school's going to go down that route and actually not have the cookie cutter one-off PD, and they're going to actually dedicate time and commit resources, or however they're going to do it within their school, be that internally, externally, however, you've got to have some way of measuring impact, so if you're going to measure impact, then this is just one way. But you're right, Alice. There are probably going to be more things that need to be added to this, and maybe there's some things that I've included that don't need to be there. Hence the reason why I've actually been looking for other people in different areas who feel like they're at this stage that can implement this. Because one of the reasons I wanted to do this, I was like, right, we're third year into this journey now. What do we do now? It's like saturation. So I just felt that we needed that step to start to measure this, and perhaps should have done it earlier. So
I think it's really helpful to have those steps, because I think, like all these things, sometimes it's really tough to critique a blank sheet of paper. But as soon as you create a framework and start assessing something, it provides you with the step to actually challenge, to refresh it, to review it, to look what you can add, how you can refine it. But it's actually getting from 0 to step 1 and 2 that often is the hardest, particularly within education, I think, is in terms of introducing change. So, from I think that's really, really constructive. But I also see there's in the right way, there's conversations and narratives coming both directions. There's But how is this being introduced in the classroom, and the conversations around how that can have positive impact in lots of different ways? And then there's a strategic conversation about, well, us as a school district, a cluster of schools, a multi-academy trust, whatever our nature is around the world, we have lots of pressures, and there are ways that technology can be a lever to help mitigate, whether it's fiscal pressures, whether it's staff recruitment and retention, staff workload and well-being, whether it's curriculum and student performance, whether it's closing the feedback loop quicker, whether it's about ways of engaging with parents and community more effectively. And sometimes we're not talking about, the generative AI, we're talking about non-generative, and just how can we better understand data, because our data pools have become data lakes, and the truth is we're not using them very helpfully. So sometimes it's just about less is more, I think. But I kind of feel there's a conversation wherever you are within the educational system about how you can be looking at different measures where there can be a positive impact. And we can all sit and say, I can wear my UK hat and say, all the pressures on funding, we haven't got enough funding, we don't have capacity, our staff are overworked, the curriculum's not fit for purpose. Matt's going to kind of go on with another 20 points past that point. But the reality is something has to give. And if there isn't a magic check, part of that conversation has to be, how can we use technology to give us more capacity, give us different ways to make what we do fit for purpose for our learners? Matt, help me out, because I know this is something you can go on with.
Nothing I disagree with there. I'm sat here thinking, I'd be interested to know what the Australian approach is. But when we talk about AI and everything you're saying, whether it eases workload or changes the curriculum or whatever, how are schools in the UK or in England especially supposed to embrace AI when they haven't got a decent internet connection, when they haven't got a wireless infrastructure in school, when the staff haven't got devices and the basic training? So it seems to be like, until we actually talk about AI in England, I think there was a Pearson report a while ago, and it was 1.3 billion to get every school up to a certain standard in terms of digital infrastructure. And you need to get that done first, I think, before you can talk about taking the whole system with you and using AI. But is it similar in Australia, Nick?
Any technology risks broadening the digital divide as much as
absolutely, yeah.
It is similar, Matt, but it's similar in different ways. The challenge here, and some people are aware of this and some people are not, is the vastness of the country. And the majority of the population lives in metropolitan areas all around the coast. Actually, in only about 4 different places around the coast. So anybody else who lives in the middle, it's not like the middle in Britain. The middle, to get to the middle, is a significant journey. So if I'm going to go to the middle from here, and I live if you look at it, I live right where, if we're looking north, east, southwest, I live at where the bottom of the arrow is in south. Okay, that's where I live in terms of the country. So middle bottom, that's where I live.
Perth.
Yeah. No, Perth is over to the west.
So Melbourne, I'm guessing, Nick, are we?
No, I'm in Adelaide. So Adelaide's middle, and then Melbourne's off at a bit
Well, at least we've proven neither Matt nor I are very good on our Australian geography, but we'll cut that bit.
So you've got to get your head around vastness. So if you get your head around vastness here, anybody who lives in those remote things, they face those same challenges you're talking about there. Internet connections, relying on satellites, relying on all sorts of different wild and wonderful means to access the internet. So we do face those inequalities ourselves. In metro areas, not such an issue. We don't face those inequalities. However, the argument I would have for that is that, but everybody has mobile reception, don't they? And everybody can get on AI apps via a mobile phone. So if we're talking about inequalities, yes, they do exist. But there's also, if we're talking about free access to AI, it exists at a certain level. So the inequalities sort of get a bit messy, don't they? Because there's equality as well that it's brought into it, because it's a leveler in some respects. Although I've seen recent developments this year with some of our kids now going out and getting onto paid models, or the parents are on paid models and they're using their accounts. So there's another level of inequality going on there as to who could afford what tool, So, there is some of that mess, but I do hear you, is that if you've got infrastructure that's not there and you haven't even got digital skills, which just startles me because I left the UK 13 years ago and I'm like, so those problems still exist that existed 13 years ago then, yeah?
Is it similar for curriculum then? Because, I mean, a lot of people say to me in England, and Al know secondary more than me, but in primary, the sheer wealth of stuff we're supposed to teach in the national curriculum, much of which is increasingly useless, means the pressures and the accountability systems means that a lot of people say, we simply haven't got time to talk about AI and things. We don't want to talk about digital agency. And my argument is always, well, actually, you're doing the kids a disservice here because that is the skills of the future. But I understand why they say we haven't got the time to do it.
Yeah, and we get some of that here, but it is different here. It's far more contextual. So each state is different. Although we have an Australian curriculum, New South Wales refuses to follow that curriculum. They have their own version. Victoria also has their own version as well. I had no idea what Western Australia does. I've no idea, and I've no idea what Tasmania does, and nobody actually knows what Tasmania does. It's just a small island in the middle of nowhere. But South Australia follows the Australian curriculum, but then you're accountable to an exam board at the end. Unlike you have like EdXL and AQA and all that, that's not the way it works here. You just go into one qualification. So in Victoria, you'll go to their qualifications. In New South Wales, you go to their qualifications. And in SA, we'll go by a CIS. So the Australian curriculum works up until year 10, and then you're into CIS. And all you're concerned with is what CIS want you to do. So as far as CIS goes, they are being open to AI right from the word go. I actually met with the head honcho within 2 months of ChatGPT came out and just said, it was a 3-hour meeting where I was going through, you do realise what this is like. And he said by the end of it, he said, yep, we're going to support all of that. As long as it's cited, it won't be allowed to be used in timed exams. We'll take a positivist approach. And they have done ever since. So if you look at that as a driver of the state that I live in, that makes a huge difference, doesn't it? If you imagine that AQA or EdXL or whoever the big hitters are nowadays in the UK, if they were driving that would probably change people's mind, wouldn't it? In respect of confidence, in respect of skills. Now, if you compare that with New South Wales and Victoria, who banned it in a lot of ways in their public school to begin with, because their exam boards, it wasn't the curriculum, it's actually the exam board, their main exam board, the VC in Victoria, and God, it escapes me, whatever it's called in New South Wales. Their exam boards were going, oh no, we're not having any of that, and are still not having any of that. You actually have to do exams in every single subject in New South Wales, and you have to handwrite them all. Yeah. So, I mean, you don't have to get slate and chalk out, and you don't have to slaughter a pig before you start the exam, but you see what I mean? There's a huge difference in respect of, so it's different where you are. Now, they have released their bans in school, but they're still facing that huge issue. So you may teach all your kids everything you want them to teach them, but ultimately, if you're going to be driven by an exam board that's not going to allow any AI because it's a written exam, or even if it's not written, it's a lockdown browser.
Nick, before we get too depressed with how slow our educational systems are to adapt to modern life and change, and Matt and I have already had plenty of episodes talking with all sorts of guests where we've extolled our frustrations at the curriculum's inflexibility and difficulty in us actually moving forward at pace. Tell us about the main thrust of your book you co-authored, The Next Word for AI and Teachers. If someone was doing the very traditional, Matt and I were bumping it into you in the lift and saying, Nick, tell us about the new book. How would you best articulate it, and what are you hoping people will get from it having a read?
It's really bringing together perspectives on a global scale, talking to many people, seeing what they face at this juncture in time once generative AI's emerged. It's really getting them to articulate their sort of fears, what they're seeing around them, and bringing those together in threads and getting that sort of picture about the main themes that are in people's heads and that they're seeing within their schools and they're seeing with teachers around them. And we're actually working on another book now, which is about AI and learners. So we're trying to bring a similar perspective about AI and learning, not AI and teaching, where we're actually interviewing students, bringing students together, which of course is more complicated work. But yeah, we feel that we need to do that. So this one's about AI and teachers. and then the next one's about AI and learners. So all those issues that anybody could probably bring to mind and some more are featured within that book around, like about teaching and generative AI.
And they're transferable wherever you are in the world within the education space. They're not Australian specific, are they?
No, not at all. We've got people in the States in there. We've got people in Central Europe. We've got people in the Middle East, people in Singapore. Yeah. So, I mean, the two authors, myself and Matt, come at it from an Australian angle because that's where we work. But we're trying to overlay it with that global perspectives to get, to see that the similar things we're talking about is exactly what other people are talking about as well.
Yeah, and I see a correlation. Lots of stuff that I try and share on a weekly basis, including from your good selves, very much aligns with those same pressure points and frustrations from other places around the world. But more importantly, it's not just here's the problem, damn it. It's here are some stepping stones and here's some solutions. Here's strategies to try and move the conversation forward, which I think is the important thing.
Yeah. I mean, it has action points at the end of each chapter. We've tried to do that quite simplistically. Working with Alicia at Amber Press has just been absolutely gold, and that's been the first time I've published a book. I just couldn't believe how easy it could be if you have the right person, and I think I encourage all teachers to go down that route because you can find these publishers now working in these niche areas with educators who want to bring out your voice, and it's a great way to reflect and to network and to bring things together.
What's the deal with Amber Press, Nick? There seems to be loads of really cool books coming out from Amber at the moment.
Yeah. Well, Alicia, in lockdown, she was working for one of the big publishing companies, and she just decided, she saw that there was a niche for publishing teachers' work, so she just went down that route, and that's what you're seeing at the moment. You're seeing the product of her work. She has the same deal for everyone. You've got a financial commitment. You know what it is straight up when you go in, and then she
good resources though.
Yeah, very good. And the team she has to put together. Yeah, you wouldn't believe how fast you can get a book out if you're willing to write and you're willing to commit to it. You can get a book out really fast with her. She works as fast as you want to work.
I'm laughing because on my screen I've got authors either side, and last night I sat there, I opened up a Calvin and Hobbes anthology.
That's about my level, don't worry.
The life lessons in Calvin and Hobbes are up there with anything that's out there, but yeah, that's my level as well.
I sit thinking 6 to 7 months if you're lucky from submission to output, and then I kind of see this stuff coming out from Nick, and I see some stuff Brett Salakas I'm a fan of, and he's sharing stuff coming from Amber Press, and I keep looking at it and thinking, there's some really good stuff going on. There's some great books. How come they're managing to turn this around so quickly? It's just a constant flow at the moment, in a great way, because I love seeing fresh perspectives, and I think it's very noticeable that Amber suddenly appeared on the scene as Nick's articulated there.
Can I just ask, at the start, Nick, you referenced learners, and your next book is about learners and students, whatever. When you talk about that, I'm a primary school teacher, and I often rant about facts and things that we see in this country, all about 70% of 4-year-olds have a smartphone or something like that. But I'm quite annoyed that I can't teach AI as I would like to under 13-year-olds, even though they've all got these smartphone devices and other things at home. When you talk about learners and you're getting their perspectives, what ages are you referencing there?
Well, in my school, we actually teach AI, about AI and things around and with AI from year one. So we're actually doing stuff right from there. And that usually involves the teacher at the front of the class working with kids who are then feeding into a chatbot, for instance, or doing some image generation at the front. I'd done a year one Aboriginal mythical creatures with year one students where I was using Midjourney and it was creating the images and they were coming up with the description words and it was creating these images in front of the face. The kids were going, I had kids crying, I had kids screaming, kids running around the room. It was full on insane.
Year one is what age, Nick, sorry?
Oh, year one here will be 5 and 6 year olds.
Okay.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I started off by morphing. Who did a morph Shrek and somebody else together, and then they were just, and because it develops live on screen, that hype, that's where the excitement comes. I'd urge anyone to do that and watch the effect on kids. It's just incredible, So done that kind of thing, and then we use AI tools to go like, okay, is it okay to manipulate an image? Where we'll put up an image of the teacher will put up a normal image of themselves and then put an AI manipulated images, simply using like overlays that you can use on phone apps. And then the kids will start to discuss from an ethics perspective, is it okay to use that? Would it be okay to use that if you're going for a job? Would it be okay to use that on, like in different avenues? Then we use some AI. We use Canva AI tools and we use Adobe AI tools because they can get parent permission in the under 13 space. I've just heard actually that I just heard last night that apparently Google are now saying that you can if you get parent permission, then that wipes out their 18 plus and their 13 plus rules. But I've not seen anything to prove that. But I think we've got to go down this route, haven't we, of being able to have some sort of authority oversee this, and providing we can do this, there are safe environments. There's a couple of tools I've been given that are pushing into that market as well, of being safe, confined spaces, similar to what Canva are doing and what Adobe are doing to make that safe. So, yeah, I've had a look at a couple of them. But Newark is also no age. If you've not used Newark, it's no age whatsoever. Kids love that, especially when we're
free for education.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're doing entrepreneurial units, because you can build your whole model in cardboard, Lego, or whatever, take a picture of it, and then it'll bring it to life. So it's awesome. So for that kind of thing, yeah. So, yeah, it is a frustration I get, because we've got, for instance, there's a challenge that some of our kids are in, Young ICT Explorers Challenge. I don't know if that's Australia-wide or international. And our kids want to build a bot, a chatbot. They did one last year, and we found ways round to get them to build one. And that was for getting information if you were in the middle of a bushfire. So it was a bushfire help app, was this. So it had a bushfire help chatbot, should I say. So they built that, and they won with that. It was really cool. And then the kids this year have come up with another idea, but we're faced with that problem as well. How can we get them to build a bot when they're under 13, So it's a difficult one, isn't it? And yeah, I think we're in a bit of a quandary, aren't we, as to in that side of things in 13 and non-13. Yeah.
There's going to have to be more of a, like you say, a governmental national level. We're very good at national level in creating rules as to what you can't do, as opposed to focusing on rules of what you can do or how to empower doing the right things. And of course, it's not as black and white as just saying younger children can have access to a device. It's about supervision. It's about digital citizenship. And obviously, the sooner, as Matt's alluding to, you're able to introduce that conversation, then the better, I guess. Following that theme and conscious of the clock on our session today, Matt and I always like to future gaze and just have the conversation with our guests about, where do you see things happening, in particular around AI, in the next 5 years? So if we came back and have this conversation 5 years from now, what do you think would be the one very clear shift that will have changed, whether it's perceptions or technology or whatever else you think of, Nick?
In 5 years.
That's a long time, isn't it?
5 months.
We're really rocking on.
In the AI world, wow. I think we'll all be massacred. There'll be no life form left at all. AI will have taken over the world. No, I don't believe that at all.
And cut.
Yeah. Yeah, very interested. If we carry on moving this slow, I think we'll end up with some sort of, within 5 years, I can see some sort of collapse at various levels in the existing systems we have. We've already got unprecedented numbers of school refusers. COVID showed something different. I think we will have some more universities going to the wall if they don't change. So if we keep up with the pace of change compared to in systems that we have, compared to what AI is doing and the way that technology is developing, then it's got to come to a head at a point, whether that's 5 years, 6 years, or 7 years, but it's got to come to a head, and quite quickly I think that will happen, where certain things have got to give. So it's almost as if I come back to that analogy that...
We need to switch them, don't we?
Yeah. And 5 years, wow, would it happen in 5 years? I do believe it'll happen on some levels. You'll see some universities go to the wall. You'll see some schools start to get that unprecedented numbers of school refusers not being able to function. I think you'll see far more hybrid models that exist in terms of schooling, far more alternative models. Whether by that stage we'll see a total collapse, I don't think we will, but there'll certainly be pressures on what we consider to be normal schooling.
I think that's a very good kind of summary there of where other guests we've spoken to and our own perspectives seem to align. Matt, any final words from you before we wrap up today's recording?
Nothing that will make me sound as intelligent as that. So no.
No wisecrack about Leeds United.
It's too easy, isn't it?
Okay, well, I will wrap it up with Nick. Thank you so much for joining us. Nick. Please keep flying the flag, raising awareness. Good luck with the books, and please do share when the next one's out. And let's make sure it's not 5 years before we continue this conversation again, the three of us.
Awesome, guys. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.